Hi everyone, Crista Cowan here with another episode of the Barefoot Genealogist. Today we are talking about the Genealogical Proof Standard. If that's not something you're familiar with, this will be a great introduction. If it is something you're familiar with, hopefully this kind of overview of it will remind you of some of the things that you can be doing in family history research to make your research more effective. Now, the Genealogical Proof Standard was published by the Board for Certification of Genealogists. You may not know such a thing even existed, but there is a certification board that professional genealogists can go through the certification process in order to prove that their work is up to a certain level of standards. Anybody can go through that process. You do not have to plan on being a professional genealogist. You don't have to, you can be brand new at this and look into going through that process. It's a really valuable thing to be able to measure the work that you're doing against a particular standard. Now, whether you're planning on going through certification or not, the standards, the Genealogical Proof Standard, still has a lot of value. And so I'm hoping that through this introduction, you'll kind of catch the vision of that. And then in coming months, there are 5 parts to the Genealogical Proof Standard. In the coming months, we'll cover one element each month of that proof standard, a little bit deeper dive into what it means and how you can utilize it in your research. So with that introduction, let's go ahead and dive in to this introduction. I want to start with a quote actually from the BCG website. I put it on the invitation for this particular event today, but I just think it's really, it just really concisely states why we want to be following a standard of any kind. It says, proof is a fundamental concept in genealogy, so it's a really basic thing. In order to merit confidence, each conclusion about an ancestor must have sufficient credibility to be accepted as proved. Now, when we talk about meriting confidence, basically what we mean is we want to be confident in our own work. Regardless of who else will ever see our work, we want to have confidence that we're climbing our own family tree. That's a phrase you've heard me use a lot if you've spent any time with me. One of the challenges that we have in this community is that everybody is doing family history for a different reason. Everybody has their own reasons why they're doing it, and some people are doing it to publish, and some people are doing it for themselves, just to entertain themselves, and some people are doing it because they want to pass something on to their children or grandchildren. Some people are doing it out of curiosity. I could go on and on and on. Everybody gets engaged in family history work, in this research, in this climb up their family tree for a different reason. But regardless of the reason, you want to be climbing your own family tree. You want to have confidence that what you're doing is the right thing. And so that is really, for me, the heart of the Genealogical Proof Standard. It's just a path for me to follow so that I know that the people I'm adding to my tree, that each conclusion I draw about any given ancestor or person in my tree is credible. And so that's important to me, and I hope that that's important to you. Let me just share with you, this is a silly little example that I use. I teach here at Ancestry.com. I don't know what you know about our company, but we have about 1,300 employees currently. And all new employees within the first month or 2 of employment have to go through an Ancestry 101 class with me, where I teach them basic family history. So we have people that come to this company to do all sorts of jobs, accountants and people who come to do programming, computer programming, people who come to do marketing. Just hundreds of jobs in this company. And so a lot of them do not have a family history background. Now, we do have a core group of genealogists on staff as well, myself included. But most of the people who come to this company are coming to do other jobs. And so they go through this Ancestry 101 basic genealogy training with me. And this is a little chart that I use with them. I talk about how when you do family history, like the basic place you start is with yourself, and you work your way back one generation at a time. But then I give them a caution about avoiding what we call the weak link. it's so tempting sometimes to just grab somebody that fits in a hole, whether the pieces all fit or not, and then just to keep growing your family tree. It's really tempting to do that. And some of us do that without any thought. Some of us do that after struggling with a research problem and then finally just saying, well, this must be it, and moving on. But there's a story that I share when I teach this class that I just wanted to share with you today. Some of you may have heard me share this story before. I think I shared it at Roots Tech. But here's kind of the gist of it. My mom never knew her grandfather. Her father passed away when she was 17. His mother died when he was 2. And so she never really knew her grandfather. Her grandfather remarried when her father was very young. It was not a pleasant situation. And so her father ran away from home frequently, ultimately ran away from home and joined the military in World War II. And then before my mother was born, her grandfather had passed. And so because there was no love lost between him and his father, my grandfather never spoke about his father very much. Didn't talk about that side of the family. So when my mom was a new mother, I'm her oldest, I was a baby, she decided she wanted to start digging into her genealogy. And so she would go once a month up to Salt Lake City. She was going to school here in Utah. Once a month she would go up to Salt Lake City to the Family History Library and scroll through reels of microfilm, census microfilm in particular, looking for her grandfather as a child in the house of his parents, just trying to determine who his parents were. There was nobody that she could ask in her family. She had some clues. She knew when and where he died and where he was buried. She knew what birth date was listed on his tombstone. And she knew that the family had told her that he had been born in Arkansas. And so with that information, armed with that much information, off she went, scrolling through reels and reels and reels of microfilm. Well, back when my mom was doing this was in the early 70s, she would write everything on one of those old long form pedigree charts. And her system was, if she had proven something sufficiently to her satisfaction, she would write it in pen. And if she had not, she would write it in pencil, just kind of as a placeholder until she could prove it or disprove it. And so one day as she was scrolling through the census, she found a little boy with the right name, about the right age, born in the right place, living in the right area, with a set of parents. And so she wrote in pencil the names of those parents onto that pedigree chart. And that was great. It was her way of keeping her notes. And in the early 70s, that was a little different, right? Because, it was only on her little piece of paper. It wasn't something she published on the internet or put out there in a public tree for the world to see, whatever. She just wrote it on a pedigree chart in pencil. Well, she and my father finished school here in Utah, moved back to Los Angeles where they were both from. My mom had twins. My dad got a job transfer. My mom had 2 more children. All that family history research that she had done while she was in college got stuck in a box. And sometime in the mid-'80s, one of her cousins contacted her and said, I remember you did some family history research. I'd love to get a copy of that. And so he came and got a copy of that family history research, got the box, took it down to a local copy shop. Now, copy machines today, I don't know when the last time was you used a copy machine, but copy machines today look like you took a digital photograph of the thing. Like, they're kind of amazing. But copy machines in the 80s were not so great. As a matter of fact, the quality was so poor that when you made a copy of something, you could not tell the difference between what was written in pen and what was written in pencil. And so this cousin took this copy of this pedigree chart that my mom had done, and he thought that this hole had been filled in. He thought that the information written in pencil was good, and off he went climbing this family tree. He spent lots of time, lots of money, invested into researching this family. Then another cousin got her hands on it, and she spent a lot of time and money researching. And by the time the early 90s rolled around and I asked for a copy of this family history back, I got it back on on one of those big old 5-inch floppy disks, as an original GEDCOM file that I loaded into my computer, and away I went, just researching building on the research that had been done before me. Well, about 10 years ago when I started working here at Ancestry.com, I decided I wanted to use the Ancestry.com services as if I was a brand new user. And so I started my tree from scratch. Now, I had no intention of doing my entire tree that way. I was just going to work on the first 4 or 5 generations as if I was a new customer, having a new customer experience. And so I started building my family tree, and I got to this grandfather. And something didn't sit right. Like, the pieces didn't all fit exactly. I wasn't even sure what it was. And so I called my mom, and I asked her about her grandfather, and so she told me. And she told me the story that I just told you, essentially. And I said, well, then where did Roger get this information? And she said, I don't know, call Roger. And so I called Roger, and he said, well, that was what was written on that piece of paper that I copied from your mom. So even in the days pre-internet, sometimes bad information gets spread around, and it's not that it was an intentional thing, it just happened. And so I started doing some digging, and I quickly discovered that there were actually 3 little boys about the same age, living in the same place, born in the same state, at the same time. And they were not related to each other in any way, at least not as far as we can tell to this day. And so my mom, who had just started into the research, had looked at the first one and had written it down. Now, I think she had every intention of going back and continuing that search to see if she could find if there were other candidates for the person that she was looking for, but she got distracted. And, life happens. And so this tree started being built, again, thousands of hours, thousands of dollars in certificates ordered and travel fees and all of that. I think when I last looked, there were 437 people. Excuse me. There were 437 people on that particular branch of the family tree. And it turns out that the parents we ascribed to this little boy were not, in fact, his parents. And so I had to go into my tree and unlink this child from these parents, and it was a very emotionally painful thing to do, to recognize that all of this research we had done was not, in fact, our family. Now, I left it in my tree. Initially, I left it in my tree with the hopes that someday we would figure out that we were actually connected to these people. We've actually now proven that we are not, at least not within 6 or 8 generations that we can tell. But I left them in there because most of the research, or all of the research as far as I can tell, from this couple backwards is solid. It's good research. It was just the one link that was weak. Okay. Now, I took the time to tell you that whole story again, just to reiterate that the Genealogical Proof Standard is designed to help us avoid situations like that, to help us have confidence that the conclusions that we make, particularly conclusions about relationships, parentage in particular, but also spousal relationships, that those are solid, that they're credible, because otherwise we will very quickly find ourselves climbing someone else's tree. And I don't know about you, but I want to get to know my ancestors, not 437 other people that are not related to me in any way, as interesting as their lives may have been. So let's just go through very quickly then the 5 elements of the Genealogical Proof Standard. We will go through these in more detail. I will do one show a month for the next 5 months, talking about each of these in more detail, giving you some examples of how it personally applies to your specific research. But today we're just going to do an introduction or an overview of that. The first element of the GPS is a reasonably exhaustive search. That is reasonably exhaustive, not reasonably exhausting, but a reasonably exhaustive search. That means you've looked at enough of the original sources to be able to come to some conclusions. It means you haven't come to too hasty of conclusion, that you haven't overlooked pieces of evidence like 3 little boys in one census with the same name that could overturn your later conclusion, or that could overturn your conclusions later. So reasonably exhaustive search is element 1. Element 2 is complete and accurate citation of your sources. Now, this is a point at which a lot of people get hung up or stop paying attention. Don't do that. It's not nearly as scary or overwhelming as it sounds. The idea is to just record the information that is in the source that you found and to note where you found it. That's the importance of that, so that you can find it again, so that you understand the credibility of the source or not, and so that you know exactly what information that source is providing you. That's all source citation is about. We'll talk about that in more detail in a couple of months. The third element of the Genealogical Proof Standard is analysis and correlation of the collected information. So you're collecting information here as you do your search, you're citing those sources, you're creating source citations, but then you have to look at all of that information in correlation with each other, right? We all know one census is not enough to give us a clear view of exactly what's happening in the life of a person. I once was teaching a class in Florida a couple months ago, and a gentleman right near the beginning of class, right in the front row, raised his hand and he said, "How many sources do I need before I can prove, before I can say I've proven this and I can move on?" And I think he was expecting me to spout off some number. I've even seen some of you do that. You pick some arbitrary number and say, "Oh, well, this is enough." And I looked him dead in the eye and I said, "How many sources do you need? You need all of them," right? You need to go back to that reasonably exhaustive search. Have you found every record there is to find about this person? Because a single record has the potential to overturn whatever conclusions you've already started to draw in your mind as you've collected that information. You also have to be aware that as you're analyzing that information, as you're citing those sources, as you're doing those searches, not all information is equal, okay? Not all sources are equal. And sometimes one source is just a reflection of another, meaning, the same person, if the same person is giving the information, it doesn't matter that there's three separate sources, because actually the source of that information is the same person. So you have to have sometimes independent sources, and that's an important thing. So we'll talk about all of that as we dive deeper into each of these elements of the Genealogical Proof Standard. The fourth element of the GPS is resolution of conflicting evidence. And very often, these are not necessarily linear. I know a lot of us are very linear in thinking. We want to say, I did step 1, check. I did step 2, check. And that's not going to be the case. As you start working through the Genealogical Proof Standard, you'll discover that sometimes you'll get to this analysis and correlation and realize, oh, you know what, there's more things I can search for. Or sometimes you'll get to this resolution of conflicting evidence and realize you can't resolve the conflicting evidence because you didn't accurately cite all the information out of a particular source. Or there's lots of ways in which you'll bounce back and forth between each of these elements as you start really getting into it and recognizing, or maybe even labeling, what it is that you've been doing all along. So resolution of conflicting evidence. I've actually done an entire video on this previously. I think it was in January, shortly after I went to Dr. Thomas Jones' class or course at the Salt Lake Institute of Genealogy, where we spent a week deep diving into genealogy methodology. And resolution of conflicting evidence is something that comes up over and over again. So I have done a video on that, but I will, again, in the coming months, do one specifically as it relates to the Genealogical Proof Standard, so that you can see it in line with some of these other elements. And then the fifth and final element of the Genealogical Proof Standard is a soundly reasoned, coherently written conclusion. And I'm just going to key in right now on that word written. I think a lot of times we just plug information into our family tree, whether it's online or in Family Tree Maker, and we think that that's sufficient, that we've put something in the blank box. And that's good. That's good that you're putting that information in there. But think about yourself 20 years from now, coming back and looking at that, and then looking at your evidence and looking at what you put in that field. Are you going to know why you made that decision? Okay, you maybe had to resolve some conflicting evidence, you had to analyze some things, you had to come to some conclusions. Are you going to remember why you made those conclusions? Or if you're doing this for your children, are your children going to be able to look at that and look at whatever notes you have or whatever sources you've collected and come to the same conclusion? Or do you need to write out why you came to the conclusion you came to? I find that I use the notes feature in Family Tree Maker a lot to do that. I cite my sources, I transcribe all the records I find, and then near the bottom I usually will, as I'm resolving conflicting evidence, make some personal notes about why I came to the conclusions that I came to. So soundly reasoned, coherently written conclusions, that's the fifth and final element of the Genealogical Proof Standard. As I mentioned at the beginning, I will be covering one of these. This is just an introduction, but I will be covering one of these each month in a show. So go ahead and make sure you pay attention to the schedule on Facebook so that you know if this is a topic of interest to you, you'll know when that show is going to be. If you would like to purchase your own copy of Genealogy Standards, it's called Genealogy Standards 50th Anniversary Edition. It's published by the Board for Certification of Genealogists. It covers each of these 5 elements, but also goes very deeply into each of them. It can only make you a better genealogist. I have a copy of this that I keep with me. I actually carry it around in my laptop case, so whether I'm at home or on the road, I always have a copy of it with me. I find myself referring to it often because I not only want to be a better genealogist, I want to make sure that the work that I'm putting out there, that the family tree that I'm building, that it really is reflective of who my ancestors actually were, that I'm honoring them by finding out the actual accurate information about them and putting it out there to the world. And so I keep a copy of this book handy. You can just Google a copy of it. I know they sell it. BCG sells it through a bookseller if you go to their website, or you can purchase it on Amazon.com. I think it's anywhere from like $12 to $15 depending on where you purchase it. But it is an invaluable little manual that can only help you be a better genealogist. Well, that is the overview today of the Genealogical Proof Standard, or the GPS as we call it in family history. Hopefully that's been useful for you. As I mentioned at the beginning, this is for everyone, whether you're interested in certification or not, whether you're a professional genealogist or whether this is the first week you've been on Ancestry.com, it doesn't matter. The point is we want to be climbing our own family trees, not somebody else's, and this can only help us do that better. So hopefully you're intrigued enough by the overview to join me in coming months as we dive into each of the 5 elements of the GPS one at a time in more detail. And in the meantime, feel free to go pick up that book, Genealogy Standards, so that you can do a little studying on your own. Well, we're at the end of June. That means that the July event calendar for our live stream sessions in July is just about finalized. I've just about got that finalized, and we'll be posting it on the Ancestry.com Facebook page probably tomorrow or Monday. So keep an eye out for that so that you can RSVP for those events that have topics of interest to you, or you can just join us every Tuesday and Thursday live, knowing I will be on chat immediately following the presentation, or you can watch an archived version of this on our YouTube channel and leave whatever comments necessary there. Until next time, this is Crista Cowan. Have fun climbing your family tree.